welcome to Plant Pod. I'm Rob Romej. We've got Makenna Ayres and Brian Hook back for more conversations on our Kingdom Framework series. So we did a really good summary on the last episode. Well, I say really good. I'm the one who did it, so I felt like it did pretty good. A pretty good summary on the last episode of everything that we've talked to. And we kind of asked some questions.
It's kind of like the Oscars. You know, they gather everybody out and they just compliment each other all night. Right. So we can do that.
Well, I just complimented myself.
Yeah, that's true. That's what the Oscars is.
Oh, okay.
That's what it is. Yeah.
Apparently I don't watch it enough. But thank you, I guess, or something. Thank me. So the question that I had asked on the last episode was, what would it look like if a church were to live out these principles of kingdom, disciple, and society? And we got to the end of it, and Makenna, you pointed this out. We didn't really fully answer that question. So I want to ask it again, because I think we really want to make sure that we understand everything that's gone on in our conversation up to this point. And I think we've done that to the best of our ability that we can with the time that we've had. And so with that said, if a church were to truly focus on the kingdom, make disciples, and go out into society, what would that really, really look like? And so I'm going to throw that out to the two of you.
It's a good question.
Eyebrows for our audio listeners.
Well, last time you threw that out there, I took us off on a wild goose chase, so we didn't answer the question. So,
but it was helpful. But
I think one thing is since we started with the kingdom, we defined the kingdom, and that's really Jesus in action. That's the 3-word definition that Dallas Willard gave. And I think that if you can connect the people to that reality, then you're seeing people that are gathered as well as scattered, always seeing Jesus in action. So I think sometimes we'll go to church and, we'll say things like, wow, Jesus was, present, or worship was great. What we're hopefully saying is Jesus was in action there. Jesus was working in my life or the lives around us. But that should also be the case every single day, every moment of every day. And I think a church that really is a kingdom church is constantly experiencing Jesus in action in their life at home, as well as in their workplace, global mission. They're just constantly experiencing Jesus in action. You don't have to do a mission trip to do that once a year. It's a constant mission trip. It's a constant dynamic of being on mission with God. So I would just right up front say that you're seeing a lot of that. Okay,
that's really good. That's helpful, and what it makes me wonder is, so Makenna, you've shared a little bit about some of your background. You grew up, going to some mega church type of stuff, and you've seen other churches. You've even gone through and done a lot of studies and all sorts of Bible-related things, and right. So, so what has this done for you, maybe personally? What does that look like, or what are you seeing? And not to assume that this is totally foreign to you. Maybe you kind of had some of these concepts, but at the same time, having it all condensed in our conversation, as well as some of the stuff that you and I got to sit in on with the Aspire. What is it called again? Imagine the training. And what kind of things? How does this look different when we get to the church piece to you?
Yeah, I think more than anything, it's helped me to kind of put words to what I was missing. So I was, growing up in a non-denominational megachurch, and when it's all it's kind of, especially if you grew up as a kid like I did, it's hard to realize that you're missing something because that's all you ever know. But getting older, and especially growing in my faith and studying theology and starting to recognize some things, I realized that I was missing something. There was something that I was not getting from my church that I felt was kind of just leaving me stagnant. And not that, the church needs to give you something. It's not about consuming. Actually, it's quite the opposite. But I think as you grow in your faith, you're more aware of the things that what a church should look like. And so I think more than anything, the KDSC framework has helped me realize, that's what's missing. If you're kind of like we talked in the previous episode, if you're not starting with the kingdom, and not to say that my previous church didn't, but, just in the grand scheme of things, if you're not starting there are going to be things that are missing. There are going to be holes in your congregation of things that should be there. Christ, that foundation, that are perhaps being filled with other things. Those holes are getting, spackled over with something that maybe isn't Christ. And so I think for me personally, it helped me to realize, this is why I felt that kind of void in my faith of something that I wanted. For example, being discipled, like discipleship. I was really missing out on that and maybe didn't have the words to express that. But then looking, cumulatively, and it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like I wasn't getting that, and that's something that I was desiring. Or you talked about kingdom just being in like the DNA of a church, right? Which makes sense. If you buy, if you're going to raise like chickens, right? And you buy chicken eggs, a snake comes out of the eggs, that would be alarming, because what you thought you had was a chicken egg. And so kind of the same thing, if kingdom is in your DNA as a body, if something else comes out, that's kind of an alarm to everyone. Something is wrong here. Something is going awry. And so I think that kind of gets into what you were talking about, being surrounded with those kingdom leaders. If something else comes out, if church comes out first, you're around people who are going to be able to recognize that. But I wasn't. And so when these things would come out, there wasn't anyone there to be like, maybe that's not, maybe that's not the direction, or maybe that's not where the Lord wants you to be, or that kind of thing. And so I think it's been really pivotal for me to be able to point to these things as, yes, if I'm starting here, if we're starting here, this is what it should look like. And so I think it's just, it's been really helpful, and it's always reassuring to know, like, there was a reason I was feeling this way. So maybe even just like on a personal level, like affirmation of, I'm not crazy. Like I knew something was like something was wrong, not, like gravely wrong, but something was awry that I couldn't quite pinpoint. I knew I could pinpoint symptoms of, there's this thing that I don't love, like there's this thing that I don't, is not my favorite thing in the world, or I feel like we could be doing this better, or maybe, all of these different ministries, but are we discipling people? Are we doing these things? I like how
you said that you got to put words to it,
right?
Because sometimes we might be thinking through things, or in our own time with the Lord and in the Bible, like we read these things, but really being able to put words to it, there's a real big power in that, is what I have found for myself too.
Yes.
So I can relate to that.
Nailed it.
So then what would you, to ask you another like focused question?
Sure.
Like how does this then look different? Like what do you picture when we talk about KDSC and having a kingdom framework? And what would the church be doing? What would, so Brian, when you just said that it would be a lot of Jesus in action, like what does that sound like to you, Makenna?
I think of that chicken egg hatching a chicken. Like that's what happens, right? I think of the kingdom DNA just naturally being the overflow of the body. And so in my head, I see people in their day-to-day sharing the gospel. That's just normal for people, sharing the gospel. It's normal for
like
people
at their work,
anywhere they go. Like that's not like a, oh my gosh, huge news for the first time in 5 months, like I shared the gospel, right? That's big news that I think some of these other churches that start with church, but in like a kingdom framework, that's normal, right? And just in your going about in your domain, that's normal, because that's the overflow. If you're starting with Christ will be the overflow. And so I see people naturally sharing the gospel. I see people naturally discipling others. Maybe we kind of talked about in the discipleship episode, not necessarily going out of their way to schedule these one-on-one weekly appointments. Maybe, perhaps that is for some people, but I see that happening naturally, just because that's the overflow of starting with the kingdom and letting it flow into disciple and society and church. These things are naturally happening, not as a targeted thing of like, okay, now we need to set aside some time to do these things. No, that's happening all the time. And yes, it is good to remind your people of those things, but they're doing it without the leadership having to ask them, hey, like, have you done this recently? Like, have you discipled anyone? They're already discipling people, and they're already being discipled. And so I think in my head, it kind of just makes sense. It just clicks in that way of, if you're starting with this DNA of kingdom, you're not building your castle, because that's not the cornerstone. That's not yourself is not the cornerstone. And so I just see that kind of happening, and I see people naturally growing in faithfulness and holiness, and that happening as a result of Christ being the cornerstone, starting there, joining with him on his mission, and not us embarking on all of our own little missions apart from, gathering from an hour on a Sunday morning.
Oh, that's really good. Yeah, no, that's helpful. That's, Best way I can put that is it sounds exciting too, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is exciting.
What about for you, Brian, as far as a church planner, even if you can think back to like when you started Aspire or helped other people with church plants, and you're thinking about all of these different principles. We've got Kingdom, Disciple, Society, and then you get to church. What is it about the church part, if you've done all of those, that excites you the most?
Yeah, I think anytime you start a church, it's exciting because you're literally having to trust God. You're not joining a church that already has a building and air conditioning, everything is all set up, you're just kind of joining maybe a class or something. No, I mean, it's like, it's on you and it's on every single person in the living room and it's on God, but there is a responsibility that's on you too, to step up and to be a part and to pray and to give of my life and give of my time. That's kingdom, just by the fact of starting a church. Vance Pitman says that when God bursts a church, you're being invited into God's activity. And I think that that's what you're doing. So there's this kingdom invitation that you have sitting around a living room saying, hey, we are going to plant a church. And I think that there's all kinds of debates of how you do it. Sometimes people will start with maybe 100 Christians. Other people, I remember Alex McManus, Erwin McManus's brother, he said, I would rather be in a room of 99 lost people and I'm the only Christian than to have it flipped and to be 99 Christians and one lost person. It all depends. It depends who you are, but it's exciting, when you think, wow, to have all these people to say, hey, if we're going to grow, we're going to have to lead people to Jesus. And I think that's why you see so many people come to know Christ in a church plant. Statistics show that you're going to see more people come to know Christ in those early months and years than other seasons. And it's exciting. So you're praying and you're saying, God, if you don't show up with a building that we can meet in, or if you don't show up and show me who I need to, share Jesus with, then this is not going to work. So there's a constant dependence upon God. And I think that lends itself to kingdom. So just by the fact of being a part of a church plant, if it's kingdom focused, you're reaching people, you're sharing Christ. So as you grow though, you're immediately multiplying small groups. So you're constantly getting this DNA of sending too. So you're constantly, your small group is getting larger. So it gets about 10, 15. You have to multiply out. So you're sending 2 or 3 couples to start another small group. So you're constantly doing kingdom all the time. And so you're giving out. If you hold on to them, you're not kingdom anymore. You're church framework all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to lose these people. Now you're focused on people again, right? We talked about that last episode. So you're constantly having a kingdom mindset of multiplying and discipling and continually getting smaller as you get larger. And I think that's an important dynamic of it. So you're sending. So you never stop sending either.
And that assumes, in order to live that out, that assumes that you've got small groups to begin with. So
you gotta have small groups. Yeah, you see every large group, small group. We've talked about that in previous episodes, but you have a large group, small group. You're very focused on disciple making and the mission of God moving forward. So if you were to say, okay, boil it down, we boil it down to what are your environments? Spending time with God, your small group, your large group, and you're being sent on a regular basis. So that's really your dynamics, small.
Those are the 4 big areas that you're
time with my small group, time with my large group, and being sent out. And you focus on that all the time. So you're constantly, seeing that multiplied as well. You're seeing that small group multiplied. And then sometimes you actually plant a church, and that's actually multiplying a large group and a small group. So you're sending people out, and that's going to be a small group, and then they're going to have small groups and large group as well. So you're just multiplying that out. It's not rocket science. It's you continually multiply your small groups, and as you continue to grow and you make disciples, you send out somebody that's going to be that leader of that next church, and then you send people out to go with them. We have sent out, it was great to see Doxa the other night and to worship with them. And, I just counted how many Aspire folks were there. I think there were 15, 16 of our Aspire folks, many of our great leaders that were there that night. And we sent them out. I mean, I remember praying for 15 people to be a part of Aspire. And here we are sending out people to be a part of this other church. And so, that's just part of it. And then also giving is huge. Giving is not just Some people teach tithing and some people teach, generous living. At the end of the day, it's giving, whatever you call it, it's letting go of something that is really important. Money is important to people. And as you give, that's a kingdom dynamic because we're joining God in what he's doing. We're literally trusting God that he's going to use those funds, his money, to further his kingdom. It's his money. And so I give it to him. He doesn't need our money. He does it so we can just continually let go. So you have this idea of praying, God, it's your will, not my will, be done. It's sending. These aren't my people. They're your people. This giving, it's your money, not my money. So there's this constant flow. And if you want to have a kingdom citizen, they're giving, they're sending, and they're praying. And those are aspects you look when you see somebody in your church and you say that's a kingdom citizen. They're constantly in prayer. They're constantly have this attitude of being sent, and they're constantly have an attitude of generous living. You just see it.
That's really cool. What I loved, I liked all of that, but what I liked about in that is it's cool because it's cool to picture a church that as it grows, you get more people, that the focus is then to multiply. But then underneath that and within that, you're actually practicing and modeling that. It's kind of like the DNA sort of analogy with your small groups. Like you're practicing it in small group. As a small group gets bigger, it's so important to, and I've even seen it in our small groups too, right? Like it's so important for us to make sure that we have the focus on multiplication, which is so easy in a small group to go, but do we need to, or right? Like it's hard because there's people that you care about that you've gotten to know, and if you're not willing to do it there, are you willing to then do it when it gets to like your whole church? I think that's where it's cool to see how those things are very important. I like that you brought that up.
Yeah, and I think you say when is a good time. I think it's important that you just I wouldn't encourage splitting a group right down the middle. If you had 10 people,
Right.
I wouldn't
You
encourage
talked
you
about
to
2 or 3.
5, and now you got 5 people. I think you try to keep the community. But I wouldn't shrink back at all from stepping out in faith and sending 2 or 3 within 6 months. If you've been around 6 months and you have 2 or 3 that could be sent out, let them do it. It's amazing how God will just replenish that group.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if there's anything specific that you wanted to talk about, because I have another question.
Go ahead.
But okay. My other question is, as you do this, obviously the hope is that we've seen a lot of people, in a church plant that are coming from death to life that maybe don't even have a church background. But in that process too, I imagine there's going to be, and we've experienced this, you get people who have grown up in the church, either different denominations or similar denomination. And I would say that most people probably grew up in a different framework than what we're talking about with this kingdom framework. And so from your perspective, like how do you help bring people into that mission of being kingdom minded and focused? Like what kind of things can you do?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I think you just do it.
End the podcast now.
I think you just do
recording.
it. I don't think you if you focus too much on those people, you'll miss your kingdom framework. So
Okay.
they're buying into something, they're seeing activity, they're obviously excited about being a part of it, or they will see it in action and say, that's not for me. And you want to make sure that's done quickly. Because so you're going to see a lot of people come in and you're going to see a lot of people go out in a kingdom framework church. If they're coming from another church. If they're not coming from another church and they are just buying into Christ, I mean, what a great opportunity for them to see it done right. But you don't cater and pacify those that are coming from a church framework. They either buy in or they don't.
No, that makes sense.
And typically people won't. They probably 25% of them will.
So what about the people who, let's not cater to them,
Yeah.
but people who genuinely want to try to be in, but they're struggling a little bit. Like, just how do you help the person who isn't even asking
Sure.
the question? They're just sensing something is different about this than what I'm used to, and I don't know how to handle this, right?
Yeah.
So there's some sort of authenticity there to say, like, I want to recognize, like, I don't know what's going on here. This is different. Right? Like, how do you talk about kingdom on a regular basis? If so, how do you do that?
It's so important that the people that are from the outside and they do buy into the small group, large group dynamic, because Large group's going to give them vision and direction and give that vision for framework. You're not going to find that necessarily in the small group. Small group, typically people in the small group don't want anybody else to show up because they just like the people and they don't ever want to get larger than that. So I think that you have to have the small group and the large group for them to really understand the bigness of what's going on, the vision and direction. That's where we're baptizing, that's where we're taking communion together, that's where we're seeing multi-generational people involved. So I think it's important that they buy into that, and you got to make sure that you're talking about the kingdom on Sundays as well. And so I think the training dynamic is important. So having classes that talk about it, making sure that they go to, we have what is called Discovering Aspire, which allows them to buy into who we are right up front. And for the most part, I would say half, if not more, typically buy into who we are from going to Discovering Aspire, but it gives them an idea of who we are as a church, what our values are, and allows them to join and be a part of that. So that's another dynamic. Classes, making sure they're part of the large group, small group. And I think, just the basic relationship that they have with somebody is important, because they may not fully understand what's going on, but if they make a friend, then there is that dynamic of, wow, I'm here because there's somebody here that really cares about me. And that person, it's important that person leads them to Jesus. If they're not Christian, they need to lead them to Christ. If they are a Christian, they disciple them and help them to move forward. But I think if they see the church moving forward on a regular basis of kingdom dynamics, what they're doing, I think it's important. To Makenna's comment in the last time we had our, I think it was the last episode, we talked about budget. And I think it's important to have generosity thoughts on a regular basis, to talk to them about what we're spending our money on, and to continually talk about church planning, and continually talk about sending, and continually talk about sending kids to camp. And these are things that not every church does. Not every church does church planning. Not every church is involved in mission. So I think talking about that is important as well. So,
would you chat about, because in our discipleship episode, we you and I discussed, Brian, what were you used to with discipleship when the word discipleship got brought up, and you had mentioned classes, like that was discipleship. So will you chat about, maybe if someone's listening, it's like, hey, wait, I thought it wasn't classes.
Yeah,
can you
that's
talk
good.
about how our classes are not discipleship, but there is a purpose to them?
Yeah, our classes, we have some classes like Discovering Aspire, and we have something called Starting Point, which teaches people their story and how important their story is. We also have something called Shape, which talks about their spiritual giftings. And those are more informational. Those are discovery classes, discovery of our church, discovery of who we are as citizens of the kingdom, discovery of our personality and how we can use our gifts in the body. Those are discovery things. Those aren't necessarily discipling. Discipling is really a lifestyle where we talk through scriptures. We talk about what the scripture means to me, connecting people to Christ. Ultimately, discipling is helping people connect to Christ and helping people to be the Jesus follower that they've created them to be. And so I think that the best scenario for discipling is one-on-one, just sitting down and talking to somebody. But it can happen in small group. It can happen with 2 or 3 people. That's why even in our small group, we break up into 2 or 3 people, because that's important as well.
It's organic. That's what I'm hearing. It's organic.
It's organic. I don't think it's something that it's not a class development, where I think we talked about, just sweating over, okay, I don't have somebody to mentor me or whatever, and you're kind of worried about it. That's okay. Jesus is there, and you can always follow Jesus. And it's great to have somebody to walk through that with you and to be on the lookout for somebody you can disciple. The best person you can disciple is the person you led to Christ.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have somebody to disciple, lead somebody to Jesus. In our city, there's 1.4 million people out there. So there's a lot of people that need to be discipled. The discipling begins before they come to know Christ, not when they come to know Christ. So you can begin to disciple somebody right now in your place of business or your family. And so that's what we believe with discipling. And it's just teaching people how much they're loved and how they are, what does it mean to be a son or daughter of the King, and to lead them to hear and obey God's voice. And that's kind of a conclusion of everything, because that's where we started.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
I'm glad that you brought up the distinction on the classes, because we really don't do a lot of classes. We mentioned
Right.
that and we talk about that, but yet we do have classes, so it could sound contradictory, but also just really emphasizing that these are informational discovery type classes. I like that word, because as an example, I can picture someone, you go through one of those classes, starting point or shape. Now, oh man, I think I know what my gifts are, but what do I do with this? Well, that's the discipleship piece. Like take that into the discipleship piece and maybe ask someone who's walked that path and, like maybe you already have someone who is discipling you like, hey, I think I'm really good at this, or I think God has given me this gift. Like, what do I do with it? That's the discipleship piece.
I think it's a great place for it, discipling with people and to say, even your small group, hey, I think I'm a singer. And, you hear them in small groups sing and you're like, you take them aside quietly and say, you're not a singer, but I encourage you to continue to make a joyful noise. But what does God have for you, right? So we're not naming names or anything like that. But I think the small group is a great place to see whether or not those gifts are valid gifts for them. Like they may think they're a preacher, but then you hear them preach, and you're like, you're not a preacher, know, or not a worship leader, not a singer. But at the end of the day, I think that these spiritual gifts are lived out in the body. And I think for those that are listening, if you're under 30, I don't think I knew my spiritual gifts until I was about 30. I mean, it just takes time to really discover them and to hone them and all that.
I still ask questions.
And that is part of the discipling journey. It really is.
Yeah, no, that is helpful. I would agree with that. I think, with help of you and other people in our church, that definitely helped me. But it probably wasn't until 30 that I felt more confident in that. But then I still feel like I'm still asking questions about, like more refining questions, like what exactly, how does this play out? Where are some of my other strengths? So I think for the listener out there, like it's probably an endless thing that you'll continue to learn, but sounds about right. Yeah. I also love that you wrapped it up and bringing it back to praying. That's good. Like you said, that's where it all starts.
It does. It starts with prayer and hearing his voice and following, his voice and doing what he commands us to do for his glory. At the end of the day, it is about his glory, not ours. And I think that's where the shift happens with kingdom versus church framework. Church framework is always about my glory or the church's glory. Yeah. And the kingdom framework is always about his glory. And at the end of the day, the church fades away. There will be no more church in heaven. We will be the body of Christ. We'll be his family in heaven, right? We'll be the family. And as we come into a new season of the kingdom in heaven, it'll be powerful. It'll be his glory, right? That's the only thing that'll matter.
Absolutely.
We're just simply a tool right now to bring people into the kingdom, to experience who he is. And the kingdom was before the church. The kingdom is after the church.
When I was doing the summary on the last one, and I said, you picturing someone who wants to plant a church or thinks that God's telling them to, like you start with prayer. And now as we are talking about church, and it would be what I'm picturing as like just a general summary for maybe it's not the best one, but it sounds good to me, is picture this church, this body, all these people that are constantly just asking God, like, what are you doing? And constantly asking God together individually, but just trying to seek him and what he's doing, where he's at and how we can join him, what gifts that we have, who to disciple, all those things that we talked about, but it's all wrapped up in just continue to like seek the Lord and ask the Lord together, right? So that's a good way to end it. So.
We did. There's a lot of things we left on the table. There's a lot of things about leadership and whatnot, but maybe we could talk about that in other sessions.
Sure, unless there's anything else that you want to say before.
No, I think we just appointed 2 elders. Congratulations, Rob.
Thank you very much.
And we talked about the leadership of the church. The 2 specific leaders in the church being the eldership and deacons, and we talked about both of those.
Eric is the other elder. I just want to give him a shout out.
Yeah, and you go to our website at aspiretucson.com and look at those messages. But we talked a little bit about eldership. We talked about deacons. But church polity and all that, it's wide open sometimes in Scripture. You have those leaders, right? I mean, it's not like an option. You should have elders. And deacons are as needed. That's what we talked about. As the church is growing, they appointed deacons. But, how you function as a church as far as voting and all that kind of stuff, I think it's wide open. We are told, though, that we have to be in one accord. Yeah. We have to be united. So how you make decisions better lean in that direction. Make sure you don't create something that's a problem, and I grew up Baptist and everybody had a vote. And I don't ever remember it being one accord. It just was always
More of a majority.
Yeah, like 85 to 15, and it's too bad that 15 people, they're gonna have to go find another church, and then it's just constantly what color drapes and carpeting, and that's not how we function at Aspire. But I do think the body is important, and I think it is important to give representation to the entire body, and we could talk about that in further episodes of what we do, to do that, and how we're learning how to do that better. And so we could talk about that in the future. And I think as a church plant too, what do you do in those early stages? How is that leadership in the early stages? I think that's probably a session of its own. How do you really start? We had a board that served as a board for a time because we didn't have elders, and I think that's important too, because you can get in trouble in those first few months, even a few years, if you're not careful.
Luckily, our sending church was really supportive and helped.
They were. They did
to
help
fill
us.
in that gap, right? Which is kind of, there's some responsibility on the sending church to do those things.
Yeah,
right?
the sending church really holds the ropes for you until you can really be self-supporting. They're the ones that are in
until you
charge.
mature.
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. Well, I have a feeling that we'll get more opportunities to talk because we are doing a question and response episode.
Awesome.
So please send in your questions, anything that we've talked about as it pertains to Kingdom Framework. So it can be any one of those topics. Maybe we said something, but we moved on too fast. So go ahead and send in those questions. I'm just going to use my Aspire email. So you can send them to rob@aspiretucson.com, and I'll go ahead and put my email into the description below as well. So
Can you float it on the screen right
I
here?
could right
you?
here.
Yes.
Yes,
I
right
want it to
here.
be
I'll
right
try
here.
to do that. I'll do my best. I'm the one that's got to edit it, so we'll see what I can do.
Audio listeners, don't worry about it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you guys, and I look forward to the next ones.
Thank you.